We all want to know that our kids have the freedom to love both their parents without any strings attached. And it seems like no matter how much we agree or disagree with an ex, we all know that conflict and bad-mouthing between exes just isn't good for the kids. Mm-hmm. We know that. And while we understand this, often it's easier said than done. And when we're really gut level honest with ourselves, we might have to admit that deep down, we really just want our kids to agree with our point of view, to lean just a little bit closer into us than to our ex. And sure, we don't want to admit that. No one wants to admit it. It makes us feel a little bit self-centered, and we know we're not supposed to put our kids in that kind of position in the middle. But nevertheless, we deep down sometimes want to win this kind of perceived contest between us and that other home.
That's right. And don't get us wrong. Our real motivation here usually is not to just bash the ex. What we're really after is the best outcomes for our kids. We want them to feel loved, to experience peace, and just enjoy their life. And that's often easier said than done. For most of us, we don't really know how to make that happen and fully release them to love that other parent without feeling resentful or even jealous sometimes. That can be especially true when you're the primary custodial parent. You've got to be the one to establish strong boundaries and values and rules in your home. But every other weekend, they get to go with that quote unquote fun parent. Yeah. To have a great time, right? Or maybe you're the every other weekend parent and you're frustrated with having such little time to build into your kids. You want to teach them about character and family values, but you're feeling cut short by the circumstances and cut out of so much of their life.
And the challenging emotions that come with all of that as a parent can actually usher us into some unhealthy habits that we really don't even realize are putting our kids in a bind. And it robs them of that freedom we actually want for them to love both parents without strings attached. And all of this can end up creating some really difficult dynamics.
That's right. So today we want to have an open and frank conversation about the difficulty of something called a parental allegiance. And on this podcast, sometimes we give you some specific things to do, and sometimes we want to give you some things to think about. Today, we're simply going to give you some things to think about, and we're going to hop into that right on the other side of our intro. Welcome to the Blended Family Coaching Show, where you'll discover how to move your stepfamily from just surviving to truly thriving.
Grab your headphones and listen in as we share practical, real-life strategies for building healthy bonds,
understanding the kids' perspective,
romance and partnership,
parenting with great teamwork,
and yes, even co-parenting with a difficult ex.
We're Mike and Kim Anderson, and we believe with the right tools, every step couple can overcome the common challenges of stepfamily life.
Join us for authentic and sometimes comical conversations to discover how you can lead your family with confidence and create the future you really want.
All right. Well, welcome back. Now, we've talked about parental allegiances before, back in episode 6, and we're going to reference that maybe a few times today. But recently, we've been challenging you to kind of get into your kids' shoes and see things from their perspective over the past several episodes. And so keeping with that theme, we're looking at parental allegiances through that lens today.
Yeah, and a parental allegiance is different than a loyalty bind. And we talked about loyalty binds back in episode 29, and we don't want to get confused here.
Yeah.
A parental allegiance is different than a loyalty bind, and our kids can struggle with both of these things, even simultaneously or in different seasons that they're navigating. But we want to be clear that there is a bit of a difference, and we need to be aware of both of these struggles. Now, just to review, a loyalty bind is a child's perceived tension between mom and stepmom, or dad and stepdad. So it's the presence of a step parent that can trigger a loyalty bind. And if you haven't listened to that episode and you're concerned that your child could be struggling with a loyalty bind in those step relationships and bio relationships, then you can go back and listen to episode 29, and we'll put the link there in the show notes. But for today, we're focusing on a parental allegiance, which is a different type of a bind for our kids.
That's right.
Now, step family expert Ron Deal says that kids are stuck in the dilemma of a parental allegiance when they feel the tension of having to align with one parent or the other. The perception of having to choose between mom or dad.
And that can really create a dilemma that can start before we're recoupled, right?
Right.
And that can actually start from the point of divorce.
Exactly.
And so you may have seen this back in single parenting days as well.
Now, this dilemma creates some complex emotions for the kids who really what our kids want is something pretty simple. What they really want is to be connected to the people they love, just like we do.
That's
it's
right.
no different.
Simple, yeah.
They want to have the freedom to enjoy their parental relationships without strings attached. And they don't want this emotional tension going on. And honestly, they don't know how to handle it.
It's tough.
Yeah. So as our kids move between their two homes, they want to be able to relax and enjoy each family, but they often feel stuck in the middle. And that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
And it's not a new thought that it can be difficult for kids to navigate all the complexities that divorce and remarriage creates. We know,
I think we're aware of that.
We know these dynamics are challenging even for us as the adults, right? To manage it all. So we really can't expect that our kids will have the emotional or the relational skill set to cope well with all of this. Right. So it's probable that kids will struggle with a parental allegiance at some point. It's pretty common. And it happens when kids are struggling to adapt and figure out all of these dynamics and manage them well.
For sure.
And on top of all of that,
there's more.
Yes,
but
there's
there's more. Yeah.
In most situations, one, if not both, of the bio parents here are also struggling with their own loss and grief. Even if they've already moved on and remarried, each can still be holding on to some lingering emotions around their ex or around the divorce. Yep. Maybe there's some resentment, unforgiveness, bitterness, even this belief that their ex is untrustworthy or has some flawed character or is just a bad person. That's from our perspective. Yep. We can hold on to that.
Well, there's a reason that there was a
we're
separation,
no longer together.
Right? Yeah.
And we might have some really valid reasons to have these beliefs, right? And it's hard to let go of these old wounds and these past offenses when you're still in each other's lives, trying to co-parent. And you probably have disagreements around how to raise the kids.
Yep.
So on one hand, we've got kids who aren't equipped to understand and cope with all of these relational dynamics. And then we've got parents who could possibly still have issues between them and some negative beliefs about each other.
Yep.
So all of this really sets the stage for parental allegiances to emerge. Now, in some situations, it's almost a natural occurrence when you've got all this going on.
Yeah, I like the way you said that it sets the stage for it.
It does. Yeah. But sadly, it's the kids who internalize this and experience the brunt of the damaging effects of a parental allegiance. So we're going to look at parental allegiances through our kids' perspectives and explore how this dynamic impacts them. Yeah. It's really important that we do this.
Yeah, and it's also important that we understand that a child's sense of allegiance toward one parent or another can inadvertently be encouraged by us as the adults.
Oh, say that again.
Okay, so yeah, I know. It is hard to own, but the reality is that their sense of allegiance toward one parent or another can inadvertently be encouraged by the adults. And often this can come out in subtle ways without us even realizing the tension that we're creating for our kids. Here's just a few examples of these subtle ways that parents can unintentionally create parental allegiances. They might be invading the other parent's time with excessive calls or text messages to the kids. Like, we want to keep communication open, but there's a point where we're actually invading the other parent's time.
Yeah,
and that
there's
can
a
be
line
challenging.
there.
Yeah. Another way is sometimes casting blame on the other home or the ex for our financial pressures. Here's what it sounds like. You know, we could afford to take a vacation if your mom didn't have to have her child support check every month.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it's unintentional, but it puts the child in that situation. Sometimes we ask the kids to be quote unquote spies or tattletales on the other home, trying to find out information from them. Like, boy, that new truck of your dad's sure is pretty cool. How much do you think that cost him? Right?
Yeah.
You're digging for that information.
Putting them in the
somehow.
middle.
Yeah. Sometimes we can just blame the other home, blame the ex for our emotional pain or discomfort. Oh man, I've got such a bad headache now after having to talk to your mom about the summer schedule. See, that just puts that child in that position of having to choose. Sometimes we accidentally make them feel guilty for enjoying time in the other home. Oh, I'm so glad you had fun at your dad's house. I just sat here all by myself feeling bored this weekend. You know, or even judging or criticizing the other home's rules, their routines, the living conditions, their parenting decisions, and doing that in front of our kids, or at least within earshot of the kids. And some of these seem blatant, but often they're inadvertent and they're unintentional.
Now, we know what some of you are thinking here. You might be about to burst with outrage at this moment because you know that your ex has been the one sending these kinds of toxic messages to the kids.
That doesn't sound like me. It sounds like my ex.
Yeah, exactly. They're the ones creating this parental allegiance. Now, this is a valid concern. Now, if you're feeling like the attitudes going on with the ex are negative towards you and that their actions are leading the kids to a parental allegiance, go back. We want you to go back and listen to episode 6. We've got some really helpful strategies of how to cope with that in that episode. And it'll really help you to learn how to live in what we call the neutral zone. Really important. Also, how to cut the comparisons. We can fall into a really bad trap of comparing ourselves to that other home. And in that episode, we also talk about how to responsibly process through your own emotions without increasing the burden for your kids. You might also consider listening to episodes 7 and 8, which are all about how to help your kids process their own emotions and what to do if they've been exposed to slander and bad-mouthing about you that's coming from the other home. There's some great tips and strategies for you there.
Yeah, that's a lot of how-to in those. And those 3 episodes are focused on those things you can do. But for the remainder of our time today, we want to spend just a little time thinking through some things that we have influence over in our own attitudes and actions that impact this bind of a parental allegiance. We want to challenge you to be really honest with yourself today and to consider any blind spots that might possibly exist for you.
Yeah, we all have parental blind spots.
That's right. Yeah. And this isn't an easy thing to talk about or really own up to, but parental allegiances can have a huge impact on our kids. So we want to make sure that we're not saying or doing things that actually feed into this bind for them.
Yeah, we want to keep our side of the street clean.
That's right. You use that term a lot. I like it. It's good. First, let's talk about what happens inside our kids when they hear us say anything critical about the other parent. I think sometimes we make comments about our ex under the guise of sharing the truth about what that other parent is really like.
Yeah.
Like, we think that the kids need to be informed about that other parent's character flaws in an attempt to somehow educate the kids about their dysfunction.
Yeah.
And we think that that's really a means of protecting them or offering them some kind of awareness or caution.
Yeah, we jump in and think we need to do that.
And often it comes in really subtle ways. And for the most part, we're aware that we're not supposed to badmouth the ex in front of the kids. And we're working hard at making sure we're not doing that. But it's the subtle criticisms that can come out of us that we just don't even notice, right? And sometimes what seems like an innocent, subtle comment to us can be received as a glaring commentary by our kids. Those are
so
two very
true.
different things.
So true.
As we talk through this and just explore a little bit more, I want you to consider this statement from researcher James Bray. He's the president of the American Psychological Association. He says, when one parent speaks negatively about a child's other biological parent, the child internalizes the comment. So in other words, a child who hears a parent attacked thinks in some way that he's also being attacked. A simple comment like, oh, your father's late again, he can be so irresponsible, actually cuts the child as well as the parent. So if the child is ever late for anything, she knows, or she thinks she knows, how you feel about her now. We're so excited to let you know about something brand new we've created just for you.
We've realized that with so many episodes available here on the show, it might feel a bit overwhelming to find the topics that matter most to you. That's why we've created a simple tool for you to receive a personalized playlist focused on your current struggle or your biggest challenge.
That's right. It's called the Blended Family Breakthrough Quiz. You'll answer just a few questions, and based on your responses, we'll email you a curated custom playlist of episodes that are specific to you.
This simple quiz will direct you to the most impactful episodes that pertain to you personally and keep you on track in your journey of discovery, learning, and growth. So, scroll all the way to the bottom of the show notes for this episode and click the link to take the Blended Family Breakthrough Quiz today.
Okay, let's get back to the discussion.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Let's just stop and think about that for a moment. You know, if you criticize your ex's character flaws to your kids, even if it's subtle, you're running the risk of loading your kids up with criticism against themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they may internalize it.
Yeah, because when a child hears that mom believes that dad's irresponsible or that he can't be trusted or that he's selfish, and the child then thinks that, well, you know, since I'm a part of dad, I must also be those things. I'm irresponsible. I can't be trusted. I'm selfish.
Yeah, that's what's going on underneath a lot of their thoughts. They may not be able to verbalize that, but research would even show that that's what's going on underneath
their
their
internalizing.
emotions.
Yeah. And this is hard for us as parents to believe because as adults, we probably don't have a reference point to draw from here.
Yeah,
We've never been in this position unless you were raised with a parent that badmouthed the other parent. And we know what that feels like. That's really the only reference point most of us have. So it's hard to understand. But we want you to know research clearly confirms that our children internalize our beliefs about the other parent and project them onto themselves.
Wow, that's pretty weighty.
It is.
Yeah.
So even subtle criticism for any purpose can be really damaging to our kids. Now, James Bray goes on to say that a negative comment subtly invites children to agree with the comment, which children hate to do. It implies that they are choosing one parent over the other, and that brings guilt. Because of the internalized negativity and the guilt over having to choose sides, Bray suggests that the child will eventually act out such hurt and anger in some destructive behavior.
Yeah. Wow, what an interesting statement. I think that, that makes me think every time one of those subtle comments comes out, it's almost like the kids hear at the very end of it a little question of, right? Oh, your dad's so irresponsible. Right? like even though you didn't say that, it's really possible that they're in a position where they're feeling expected to agree with you.
Yeah, and that brings anger and guilt.
Yeah, what a challenging thing. And Bray here in his comments has made it possible for us to put ourselves in our kids' shoes and see how easy it is for parents to just create and reinforce these parental allegiances even inadvertently.
Yeah, we don't mean to.
No. Now, notice the emotions that he describes here. He uses words like kids hate to be in this position. They don't want to have to agree with these negative comments. It elicits, he used the word guilt when they feel forced to choose sides, which brings about hurt, anger, and acting out.
Yeah, it's pretty clear.
It is pretty clear. And so we just have to be careful with that here. And rather than trying to, I'll use the word educate or protect our kids from our ex's character flaws, we really need to focus on protecting them from any and all criticisms of that other parent. And in order to do that, we've got to learn some healthy ways to process our own disappointments and frustrations, or even seek healing from those old wounds Kim was talking about earlier, and the unhealthy relational patterns that might be set up with our ex.
We got to do something different.
And honestly, that's our responsibility. And so we have to own that. We have to do something about it. And as much as it's up to us, we need to be able to make peace with that other home. Now, if you need some specific next steps or help with that, again, like Kim mentioned, go back to episode 6 and explore some of those ways that you can actually do that. But today, we're just trying to open up some awareness of what the kids might be experiencing when they're stuck in this parental allegiance.
Yeah. Now, maybe your ex really does have some negative character traits.
Yep, it does exist.
But it's not your job to point those out to the kids. That approach ultimately puts them in a position of choosing sides, and it feeds into that parental allegiance. What you really want to do is let time do the teaching here. Let the kids discover for themselves those character traits about that other parent.
Yeah.
You know, there was a time when Annika came to me. This was when she was pretty young, probably 8 or 9, and just made this statement, you know, Daddy makes lots of promises, but then he doesn't do them. That was her figuring out that her dad is unreliable.
Right. You didn't have to point that out.
I didn't have to point that out to her.
It's a good example.
Yeah. They need to discover for themselves. And that way it doesn't cause the same reaction as when we criticize. Now,
the cool thing about what I love about that story is what that did is it opened up an opportunity for you to really come alongside Annika and empathize with her and love her and just say something. I'm sure you responded with something like, man, I'm really sorry that you're having that experience, honey. You're validating her. And that puts her now in a position to have you as a partner, but she doesn't have to choose one or the other. You're not forcing her into that parental allegiance.
Right.
And certainly you're not capitalizing on it. Yeah, you're right. Your dad is unreliable.
Guess what he did to me.
Yeah.
That's not your opportunity to expand their awareness.
Exactly.
But if you can do it well, if you can be your child's guide through that and help them to emotionally process and cope with it without dumping your stuff or putting them in the middle, then as they grow and discover more and more, like Annika is now in her 20s, and she still comes to us with some of her frustrating realities of her dad and shares with us. And again, we can be there. We can empathize with her. We can help her process without criticizing.
Right.
And we don't want to go to the other extreme either. Some parents will try to cover up the other parent's bad behavior. When the child is being impacted, they kind of try to sugarcoat it. And you don't need to do that either. Children can cope with a parent's actions if they know what to expect. They really don't need the truth to be sugarcoated, but they also don't need you to dump your own opinions onto them. They need to go through a discovery process on their own, and you can support them through that.
And that just takes time. Like you pointed out, let time do that teaching.
Yeah,
that's good.
Let them discover it.
Yeah. So that's all, we've got to be aware and thinking through these subtle ways that we inadvertently feed into these parental allegiances. What else do we need to consider?
Well, maybe you genuinely aren't criticizing your ex or consciously saying or doing anything to demean that other parent.
Right.
But if you're honest with yourself, could you possibly be leaning into patterns of confiding or oversharing things with the kids?
Oh, yeah.
Things that tend to make you feel justified, or even things that can minimize your own painful emotions.
Yeah.
So let me explain how this works. Sometimes parents can feel justified when our kids align with us or appear to love us more. And honestly, this can feel really affirming and really good. And it helps to ease our own pain that might be left over from a difficult history with our ex, or pain from our current pain points, especially if our ex has done hurtful things or is still doing hurtful things to us or even to the kids. So when our kids align with us, it makes us feel better, even sometimes superior. I'm a superior parent. The kids like me more. And sometimes when we're in that mind frame, we can send subtle messages to the kids that encourage them to align with us by sharing our own emotional struggles in some inappropriate ways.
That's right. Yeah. Sometimes we can get focused on getting justice and affirming or gaining validation for ourselves as the better or more beloved parent. The message that kind of leaks out onto kids can be detrimental, and it actually puts them in a really difficult position.
Yeah.
The crux of the message like this sounds something like, I've been hurt and I need you to hear my pain. So empathize and care for me.
Yeah.
Right. We don't want to admit that we do this, but it can happen sometimes, especially I think as kids are walking through some of these challenges. Often kids can appear to be maturing faster than we would think.
Yeah.
And they can seem to kind of get things. But, a lot of times kids are just trying to care for their parents, just like parents are trying to care for their kids. And so we can be lured into this false sense of maturity that they really aren't experiencing yet. And so
they can't handle.
Yeah. And that can be really challenging for us. And kids, they're going to feel this need to rescue the parent from that emotional pain and side with them or kind of take care of them. It's not uncommon. They love their parent. They love you. And so they want to try and take care of that. And it can become a problem when we see that our kids have been damaged or they're hurt by the divorce, and we want to convince them that it wasn't our doing. And that is a really deep emotional pain. We're the victim there, and therefore the other parent is the person who caused all this pain. And so we attempt to align ourselves with our kids' pain and emotionally commiserate our pains with them.
Yeah.
Now they've become our confidant and our friend and our buddy. Yeah.
Against the other parent.
Yeah. Now we might need that emotional support as an adult, but our kids is not where we need to get that.
No.
And man, I don't think anybody does this necessarily intentionally. But if we back up sometimes and we think about some of the conversations that have occurred, we might look at it and go, oh, maybe I actually shouldn't have shared that, or I shouldn't have put it that way.
It's easy to slide into this behavior.
Totally. And when all this happens, rather than simply being able to love both of their parents, the kids are in this position of feeling like they have to focus on making their parents feel better about themselves.
Yeah.
Kids in general, even if they're feeling defiant, kids really want to please their parents, and they want to make them feel good. They want to care for them and make them feel better. But instead of feeling free to enjoy time in each of their individual homes, kids who carry a parent's emotional burden are really now faced with some nagging questions. They have to look themselves in the mirror and say, whose side am I on? Who deserves to be loved more? Who do I really agree with, mom or dad? Who needs me more? Or maybe how can I make my mom or my dad just feel better?
Yeah.
They're wrestling with some of these kinds of questions.
Yeah, they're put into a caretaking mode now. And kids should not have to wrestle with these kinds of questions.
Sure.
But many kids feel like they must take on some tough choices. They have to choose when they're stuck in this parental allegiance. And when they're exposed to a parent's emotional struggles, they can take on burdens that they aren't equipped to carry. And this really sets them up for that parental allegiance to form and continue to grow.
Yep.
Now, back in episode 39, we talked about this concept of step parentification, which Lauren Retzema shares in her book, In Their Shoes. And this is where a child feels responsible for a step-parent's pain when they fail to meet an expectation. But this can become an even more difficult dynamic for kids when parentification takes place.
Yeah, with a bio parent.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about here. Listen to this quote from an article titled, "Your Child is Not Your Confidant," which Lauren also shares this quote in her book.
Mm-hmm.
Experts believe this kind of behavior, depending on children to care for emotional needs of the parent, creates an atmosphere of neglect. Because children are made responsible for looking after the emotional and psychological well-being of the parent while suppressing their normal childhood needs, such as play or friendships. When a child starts serving as a friend to the parent and the parent is getting his or her needs met through the child, that becomes problematic.
Yeah.
And, we don't have time to dive really deep into this, but we'll link that article in the show notes if you want to gain more understanding around how detrimental this is for kids' development and the long-term impact. It's really disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
But going to your kids with your own emotional baggage or your own unresolved issues with the ex, treating them as your confidant or deriving some affirmation or validation or emotional care from the kids, it's going to create and intensify this parental allegiance and leave those kids with more emotional burden than they could possibly carry. That's kind of the crux of this issue.
Yeah. Now, all of this sounds kind of, I don't know, I guess I'll use the word extreme, where we just are trying to help you understand, and even ourselves understand, what is this parentification thing all really about? And so we have to describe it in these different ways. And chances are, I mean, we rarely meet a parent who's like, oh, I just need this child so much to take care of my emotional needs. Like, we're not going to go, I'm not raising my hand going, hey, that's me. But we talk about this to really challenge ourselves to think through the way that we're interacting, the words that we're using, and where we are dependent to really kind of heal in our own life.
Lean into this.
And it's so easy because we're close to our kids and we love our kids, and generally we want to trust our kids. And like I said before, as it feels like they are maturing, it seems as though they might be able to handle more. But the reality is they're still physiologically changing. There's hormones happening. There's all kinds of things that makes them ill-equipped for this kind of thing. And they're also not going to come and say, I think you're putting me in a parental allegiance here, and I would really appreciate it if you didn't. So they're not going to be in a position to really call you on it either. Yeah. And so, again, today's episode is just to get some thoughts going around, well, what might be happening? These are things that research shows are common for blended families. Yep. And I want to make sure that doesn't happen in my blended family. So what might be true about our family, and what might we be able to change? And, these two dynamics that we've been talking about are hard to recognize and sometimes even harder to own.
Sure.
This idea of subtle criticism toward the other parent, or this parentification where we're depending on kids for our own emotional needs. So to help us really think through this and explore here, we've come up with just a few questions that you might consider asking yourself about how you might inadvertently be feeding into a parental allegiance bind. So here's a few questions. We're going to share them and then just kind of pause so you can think about it in the middle. Feel free to press pause and maybe think about it. If you're a journaler, press pause and write these questions down and write out some of your thoughts and your answers. So here's just a few questions. Am I making comments or sharing information with the kids that we both know, me and the kids, they really shouldn't share with the other parent?
Yeah. Secrets.
Yeah.
Here's another question. Do I make comments about the behavior or character of the other parent in front of my child or even within earshot of them, even just in subtle ways?
How about this? Do I ever cross the line of communicating with my child as a confidant rather than simply allowing them to just be the child?
Or this one, am I more focused on freeing my children to love their other parent, or do I have a subtle agenda for them to align more with me?
You know, the bottom line is that if we want to loosen the bind of a parental allegiance, we need to do our part, regardless of how the other parent is behaving.
Yeah.
We need to get really honest with ourselves about our words, our attitudes, and even our own emotional patterns, and how all of that might be overlapping with everyday family life and what our kids might be experiencing. Yeah. Expert Ron Deal says that the more comfortable you are with the children's relationship in the other home, the more likely it is that they will honor you and your spouse.
You and your spouse.
Respect given is respect returned. Said another way, permission connects, but possessiveness divides.
Ooh, yeah.
So such a powerful quote.
It really is. Now, we know how hard all of this is. Okay, we watched my daughter Annika wrestle with who she wanted to align with over the years. And we saw her really get bound up in this parental allegiance.
Yeah.
And it was hard. And over time, our challenges grew.
Yeah.
And we ended up in an extremely challenging season. And this included another issue, which is called parental alienation.
Yeah. This is like a whole other level.
More extreme. This is where one parent purposely comes between the relationship between the child and the other parent.
Yeah.
So that's where we're going to go next week. We're going to talk about what is parental alienation, who's at risk, and how can we protect our parental rights and protect our children from parental alienation.
Yeah, if you suspect that you're experiencing anything like that, you don't want to miss next week. We've had a really painful journey.
Yes,
and
we have.
At the same time, we've learned a lot of things, and we want to help others move through that process.
Or avoid it altogether. That would be great.
That's right. So we'll be tackling that next week. And hey, if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, we would absolutely love it if you would give us a rating and a review. Let us know how we're helping you and how we can help you. Don't be afraid to ask questions and whatnot and reach out.
We'd love some suggestions.
Yeah, so leave that over on Apple Podcasts for us or any of your other listening platforms. And with that, that makes this episode a wrap.
Until next time.